Did.
Okay, I'm going to call us to order at 6:05. And I believe we have Chris as our minute taker. So we're all set there.
She's on. Actually, do you want me to give Chris permission to talk so that if she has a question or a clarification for the minutes that she can get that?
That would be great. Thank you.
Chris, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Looks like we're good.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris. Touched. All right. Is there any public comment at this time?
Still no one in the attendees.
Okay.
So.
Okay. All right. So we'll consider that none. All right. I need a member to make a motion to approve the consent agenda. If you just say your name when you do it so Chris can get it, that'd be great.
So moved, Andrew.
Is there a second?
Steve seconds.
Steve, second. All right. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
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 Okay. All right. So we'll move down to the executive limitations monitoring report. And we have an action item to accept the monitoring report for 2.2 treatment of staff. Is there a motion to accept the monitoring report?
So moved, Sarah McLean.
Okay. Is there a second?
I second, Andrew.
Okay. All right. Any discussion?
Rob Backlund, I just have a quick question. Maybe Patrick, you can answer this. When you sent out the feedback, are there also open-ended questions where people can offer specific anecdotes versus a 1 or 4 point system?
Yes, there are. And so those questions are, I can read them to you. And because they're open-ended, we get a range of responses to those, and oftentimes there's identifiable information in those responses. So historically, I haven't shared those responses publicly. But the questions are: what do you perceive as relative strengths of the person? So administrator, basically, but by position. So superintendent, assistant superintendent, principal. And what do you perceive as areas in need of growth? So those are the two open-ended questions that are in there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, let me see if I can pull up my worksheet to ask you the questions. Maybe that'll open. Oh, that's your worksheet. Hang on. Oh. So, I guess our first question, I'm going from memory because it's not opening. I'm having all sorts of computer problems.
I have it if it's helpful, Don.
Oh, you do have it?
Have it open if you want me to ask those.
That would be great. Sure, that would be great. I have to go from memory, and I'm trying to get somebody to come help me.
That's okay. I think we can team up on this. So
okay.
The first one is it's a yes or no. Based on the information provided, do you find that the interpretation is reasonable?
Is this a thumbs up? Krista, can you see if there are thumbs?
Yes, I see thumbs.
Okay.
Enough thumbs.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And the next question is, based on the information provided, does the data demonstrate the accomplishment of this interpretation? And if no, the idea is that we note the reasons for concerns and questions.
So is that, all right?
Thumbs
so
again.
Thumbs again? Okay.
Yep.
And there were, no, I'm not hearing any other comments other than Rob's question. Okay, so all those in favor of accepting the monitoring report for 2.2 treatment of staff, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. On to the financial report. It's an update and it was in your packet. Any questions regarding the report? Patrick, you have anything you want to add?
No, I guess one little piece to add is Floyd and his team are working diligently right now to, I'm going to let Kristen in here, are working diligently right now to try and really create a little greater precision as to what that end of year balance is going to be so that we can make sure that we're taking full advantage of available funds in the current fiscal year to take care of significant projects, most notably the locker room project at Mount Abe, so that we're in the best position we can be next year to respond to the financial crisis in whatever way it presents. So that work is happening right now, and we're quite close, I think, to having a pretty accurate number for the end of year projection that gives us something to work from. And I can let Floyd elaborate if there's any more than that to add.
I think that's the high level right there. Is we're a little behind, and I would have liked to have been further along with this process right now. We had our payroll person was a previous employer came after her, and she is now working for them. So unfortunately, some of our office time has been spent making sure that we could run payroll. So I'm a little less than where I wanted to be today on that. We expect to be pretty clear on it in the next 2 days with what those numbers look like, and then prioritizing beyond there. I see Steve has a hand up.
Yeah, Lloyd, I was just curious under your notes, there's a 5200 item, which has to do, in the note, it describes 13,175 having to do with future planning and data path. And then if I look back at the detail, the 5200 number actually has an amount that's almost double that. And I was just wondering is there an update on that number, or is that including some other
I think the 13,175 is the amount that we know we can't find. As far as there being an additional number, I'm not clear on that. I'll check it and loop back to you on that one.
Okay.
Is there anyone else with a question?
I
Looks
have a
like Dave
question.
does. Yeah.
I have a question. So I noticed there's some 550,000 or 580,000 payment to private schools. There's also another 700,000 in the SPED section, but the direct instruction section has, I think it's 584 to private schools, and I just wondered what that was.
So there are some money, we have some money budgeted in the general fund in the event that a student who's not on an IEP needs to receive their education from an out-of-district placement. So that's where one of those lines shows up. And we don't always need that money, but we always have some budgeted because the need may present in an unanticipated way. And if we didn't have something budgeted, that would create potentially a very significant impact on the general fund. And then separately from that, we budget through special education anticipated costs. Those are more, we tend to have some anticipated each year for out of district placement. And we do occasionally have some unanticipated needs for out of district placement as well there. So that's why there are two different lines for tuition to out of district schools.
They're all SPED related?
Not all. There are some students that are not in special education or on IEPs that may need out of district placement. They tend to be far rarer than students that are on IEPs, just because typically when that level of support's needed, there tends to be some sort of a qualifying reason, and the student's usually eligible for special education. But there have been times, infrequently, I would say one student every couple of years that needs that level of support.
Thank you.
And those price tags can be pretty hefty, which is why they tend to be pretty big numbers. You know, it's not at all uncommon for a cost for out of district placement to exceed $100,000 per student. So even if you're budgeting for the potential of a couple of students, it adds up to big numbers.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. So our next update is community services during COVID-19. And before we get started on that, Patrick, I had asked our student reps if they'd be willing to join us and just kind of, you know, hear from them how things are going and all this. I can't see who's on, but I think Hannah should be there.
Both Hannah and Bella are here.
Awesome. So, you know, maybe give them a chance to tell us how it's going.
For me, I think in high school, our workload is definitely a lot less than it would be in school. I also feel like teachers aren't checking in with us as much as they would have in school. I have teachers from middle school that I talk to, and they get back to me in emails that my high school teachers don't get back to me in.
Thanks, Bella.
Yeah, it's weird for me, like finishing middle school in my kitchen, but I mean, our workload is like going down because school is ending, because it used to be like a lot more that we didn't have to. We have like weekly advisory meetings, which are pretty nice. Just to like check in with the people that we would normally see every day. And we have some like group Zooms, but we don't like have like actual classes every day. And I kind of like the flexibility piece of it because, like, you know, I'll do sport in the morning, you know, go outside, whatever. But be able to do like all day. But yeah, it's kind of difficult because like if you have a question about something, you have to like email your teacher and not like right there in the classroom to help you.
Hey, Han, can anyone else hear her well, or is it just Hannah? Hey, Hannah.
I think there's a lag with the voice.
Yeah, I'm going to come down, Han, because you're really laggy. You guys can move on, but I can go. Hold on.
I'm getting bits and pieces, but yeah, tricky.
I think if I go downstairs and sit next to Hannah and she talks into my computer, she could maybe share a 2-second version of what she was trying to say. Would that be okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, hang on 1 second.
Please.
I think that might be a good example of what's been going on.
I was just going to say, you can imagine that over about 1,350 students and the kinds of glitches that might present.
Steve, you almost made me snarf my water. It's exactly right. I think that is what's going on.
Okay.
Well, my wife's doing it at home every day, so I know what it's like.
All right. Do you want to try again, Hannah? Is this better? Can you guys hear okay?
That is better. If she can just speak up a little bit, that would be helpful.
Nice and loud.
It's weird. Like finishing middle school in my kitchen. Because it's not what I expected to do. And it's a little harder because like when you have a question, you have to email your teachers, and but our workload is definitely like less now that the school year is like starting to be over. And we have weekly advisory meetings where we like talk to our advisory, which is nice.
What's been the hardest? What's been one of the hardest things?
I guess not having the teachers like right there. Yeah. Especially for math. Like math is really hard remotely. Because it's not my strong suit, and it's like you don't have the in-person help that you're used to.
What's something that's been going pretty well with the remote learning?
I guess grammar, like we're doing a bunch of grammar in core right now, and that's pretty easy because that's what I'm good at. but yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings about the whole thing.
If there's one thing that you would want to continue from remote learning when school's back in session, what would it be? And it's okay if there isn't one thing. And Isabella, I'm curious your thoughts too after Hannah shares.
I guess, I mean, I like that we do like school. Well, I do schoolwork in the morning, and then I get off, and then like I'm usually done for the day, and I get to do other things. And I like the flexibility piece, I guess. I don't know if that's considered like remote learning, but.
No, that's helpful for sure. Thank you. Bella, how about you?
I definitely like that I can pick my own schedule and what classes I can do. I've been doing one class a day within the week, and I still get everything done on time, and it's been easier to deal with stress.
Great. Very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Does anybody else have any questions for either of them? Well, there's, oh, go ahead.
I'm not seeing anyone with questions for him, Don.
Okay. Okay. They are
Dave
certainly
has a
welcome
question.
to. Oh, okay.
You're muted, Dave.
I do think it's a profound question to consider what will education look like after COVID-19. And the feedback from you students is really important in terms of what was really successful that we could continue in, and I think that's what the superintendent was getting at when he asked the question, that we should continue to do after COVID-19, and what should we discontinue?
Yeah, go ahead, Katrina.
I just wanted to add that, now that we know when the last day of school for students is going to be, that the principals are spending a good deal of time thinking about ways in which we can use that last week, which is essentially 3 days, to collect some very poignant reflections from students in some more formal ways so that we can hear all voices as much as we possibly can. And also, for those of you who don't know, we did send a family survey out last week. The due date for collecting responses is this Friday. To date, we have about 350 responses, which I think is amazing. So for a survey that I've ever put out. So the admin team will be going through all of that data as well to kind of inform us about exactly this question. What from this experience might we actually be able to learn from moving forward? And what do we definitely want to improve upon should we find ourselves in this position again?
Kristen? So Kristen, you're not muted, but we can't hear you. I'm not sure what that's all about. Still nothing. I think we lost Kristen for a minute, but Caleb did put his virtual hand up and Andy has her hand up.
Yeah, this is Caleb here. I guess I'm just wondering, of course, we have our last day of school, and I know we've got our graduating seniors who won't be returning in the fall, but I'd ask the question to either or both students, does everyone just 100% really need this summer break and that's just what we're looking forward to? Or are there services that our school district could be providing over the summer for students, considering the way we ended this year and not completely knowing how we'll start the next year? I'm just wondering, are there services this summer that would be different from other summers that would be useful? And maybe that ties into some of the things we're going to continue, if there's remote supports. And it may be, I don't know what's possible, but I'm wondering, just in a world in which anything was possible, are there things this summer that the school district could do proactively for students?
I feel like, and I think I can speak for at least my other middle schools, my fellow middle school students. But for me, like the first couple of months of remote learning were like, okay, so like, I'm gonna have to get used to this. And it's like fun. Now I'm kind of done. And it's like, it's weird. I mean, I don't know, for me, my grades are pretty, still pretty stable, during, this whole remote learning thing, but maybe, things for people who are still struggling in different areas, because I know there's some kids who, still struggle in different areas, so I don't know, but, for me personally, I'm kind of ready to be done with school.
I agree with Hannah. I don't think if you were to put any services in place for kids over the summer, they wouldn't utilize them because they're done with remote learning and looking at their computer to learn.
Thank you for that input from both of you. I appreciate it.
I think Andrea had her hand up as well.
Annie, not Andrea. I actually didn't have a question. I was just going to say that I wondered if the issue with Kristen was that there were too many people on, because I know on the Hannaford Career Center meetings that we have, when there are too many people that are on at the same time, the last couple of people that join can hear everything and see everything, but even when they're not muted, we can't hear them. And I didn't know if it was that issue. So I wanted to mention that. I didn't know if that was what it was. That's all.
I switched to my phone. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. Sorry about that. No, it said my computer. I mean, I do Zoom all day. So I've already done like 8 Zoom meetings today or something. But so I don't know. I might just have to go fix it. So I was just going to say, in that capacity, I've worked with kids probably from at least 12 other schools. And I've noticed that, I know the sort of edict for middle school at least was don't teach any information online because people have glitches like we just had. Sample size that I have just says that you know, there's less, at least at the middle school and probably the high school, less interactive with teachers than those 12 other schools where some kids have classes every day or check in with someone every day. So, I mean, there's a range of models. And so I think what I would like to see the state do is look at those range of models and not just each individual school district look at how theirs worked, but pool that information to maybe figure out what worked, what didn't work for possibly even the fall. So I don't know if there's any collaboration happening at that level. But like I said a month ago, my son hadn't had a mandatory class meeting, and he still hasn't. A month after that, he hasn't had a mandatory class meeting. His TA isn't doing it, and the teachers don't. They do wonderful, you know, video instructions and video lessons, but nothing interactive. So I would like I don't know if the education department would do that, but just to look at what districts tried and try to create by the fall, you know, what works best.
Yeah, we're definitely doing that in-house, as Katrina spoke to, but I'm not hearing a lot of more regional or statewide collection of that yet, but it certainly still could happen. Oh, Katrina has something to add, it looks like.
I lost my hand. I was raving, whatever. Yeah, so I agree. I think, you know, we were very hesitant to put super, super tight parameters around every single elementary school needs to be having a class meeting from 8:30 to 9:15. Every single TA has to meet every day from 10 to 10:15. Like, we were very nervous about doing that as a district, as of course the whole state has been nervous about being that prescriptive, because we didn't really know where families were, right? So the tighter we make those expectations, the harder it is for people to meet them. I think we've learned a lot about that, and should we be finding ourselves in this position in the fall or some sort of a hybrid situation, I think a lot of what we've learned in these last 2 months is going to help inform what will work best. In my opinion, I think there are places we could be a little bit tighter in our district. Regardless of what the state puts out. There are some good guidelines out there. There are some things that are working that I think we can prescribe just a little bit more, and know that there are families who are going to need support.
And some of those families are employees, right? Who have children at home that are trying to, you know, instruct online while make sure their kids are doing what they're supposed to do. And that's part of what makes it challenging to be super prescriptive, because it won't necessarily work for everyone in their individual circumstances. Don, did you want me to kind of roll into that sort of general topic of community service, et cetera, during COVID, which I think is the agenda item that we're on right now? Oh, I see Rob has virtual and actual hand up.
I was hoping to ask one more question. First of all, Hannah and Isabel, thank you for sharing. What do you miss most about not actually going to your physical school?
Gosh, I mean, like, I missed the social interactions you have with people. Like, I didn't really think about it until this all happened, but like, you have so much more social interaction with people at school every day that are like not only the people you live with. And you know, I've been like Zooming with my friends or whatever, but it's like it's not the same for me. And also I I miss like in-person instruction from teachers because like I'm like a person who like needs to be physically like there and have other people be physically there to like learn my best. And so yeah, I guess I just miss like people being there in person and being able to come over and help if like you need it.
Yeah, I agree with Hannah on both things she said. I guess I don't have anything else to add because she hit the nail pretty hard, so.
All right, Dawn, are you here? I see a square with your name in it, but that's all we have right now. Try that. I see you're back on the phone.
Are you there? Yes.
Yep, I think now we have you.
Yeah. Yep. I have the video, the webinar going on a computer that won't hook up to the camera, and I'm listening to you on the phone. So.
Okay. I think we have both going now for you. Now the phone seems to be gone.
I just texted her to see if she wanted me to try to FaceTime her and kind of hold her up to the group. And I mean, it works with my mom and dad. I don't know.
All right, well, we seem to, oh, maybe Dawn's back. I don't know. I'll continue to watch for Dawn to return as a phone number and let her back in. But in the meantime, just a really brief update. You know, we're still continuing on in a similar fashion to what we were earlier in terms of meals are still happening and they're happening via delivery. Obviously, the remote learning is still happening. And as both Hannah and Bella mentioned, people are tiring of the remote learning. And I think those are the highlights. We're continuing on with what we're doing. And there's Dawn. But Katrina, you're muted.
You guys can see her, but I'm not sure she can see you that well, but.
I can see it on my computer.
Oh, perfect. Oh, great. All right. So they can see you if I hold you like this. I might have to translate like, again, with my mom and dad, but that's all right. I'll try.
So continuing on with what we've been doing, I guess is my very brief summary of the work we've been doing to support our community more broadly.
Okay.
We have to be really quiet now, babe. I'm not muted.
Did I miss the update? Was that what he just finished?
Yes, I was going for brevity because there hasn't been a lot that's changed since our last meeting. It's been more a continuation of what we've been doing. But I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have about what it is we've been doing.
Don, did you give up on the phone?
It keeps disconnecting. So I hear something and then I have to spend a few minutes getting you all back because it just keeps cutting me off.
No.
Looks like Sarah has a question.
I do. Patrick, are there plans to continue? I'm sorry if I just missed that you just said this, but to continue all of the meals through the summer?
Yeah, so we're going to continue delivering meals through June 12th, and we're going to continue to prepare meals for pickup through the summer. with I think a week or two off in between. 1 week, 1 week. So yes, and we have historically done summer meals at pickup locations. So we'll do what we have typically done in the summer. And Kathy Alexander's putting out a message that if someone needs the food and simply cannot make it to a pickup site, that we'll figure something out to make sure that we connect them with food. So, and that's not something that we have historically done. So that would be something new. Andrew? And let me know whenever you're ready to start calling on folks, Don. I'm not trying to take over the meeting, just trying to help facilitate.
So I know, obviously can't read the future, but are you getting any sense from other superintendents or AOE about what the fall is going to look like, given the current pace of opening things up to the economy, or that's just sort of like deal with it when we get there kind of thing?
Well, that's the trick. Certainly we're not going to be, it's a hard thing to deal with when we get there because there's so much work that goes into whatever it's going to be. And we're also not getting a lot of guidance, sort of understandably in a way, right? So guidance is driven by public health data. And public health data is pretty quickly. So what it will look like in the middle of August might be very different than what it looks like right now. We're having an echoing issue, looks like.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think
it's
Dawn, if you were to mute yourself.
Is that better?
Yes.
That seems better. Okay. Sorry to mute you once you finally got yourself squared away there, Don. But so yeah, that's the daily question. Really, is when and if and what will it be in terms of guidance for the fall. So in the meantime, we're talking about a variety of possibilities and trying to have contingency plans with what that's going to look like. So both really trying to think about what if we're entirely in person and have to social distance, what would that look like? What would the needs be to make that happen? If we're exclusively remote, how would we do that better, having learned from this spring? And perhaps the most likely, what if it's some sort of a hybrid of the two? What could that look like? So we're trying to anticipate those three sort of big picture concepts so that as the information evolves, we can kind of fine tune one of those, having done some of the bigger picture work in those areas.
So if you're not given a lot of guidance, then I'm assuming that internally you're having to sort of establish somewhat of a deadline, a date where you have to commit to moving ahead with a certain model and using other models as backup.
Well, and as the planning evolves with that, and we understand more about what it will take to pull something off, that's going to drive probably the dates by which we have to make a decision. And this is not unique, obviously, to MAUSD. This is a topic of conversation on our regional superintendent calls twice a week. So everyone recognizes there is a point in time by which we need to know what we're doing so that we can get it ready. And unfortunately, and this is going to be the challenge, right? So the public health data that we want to make decisions based on may not present itself in time to put together whatever plan is necessary to be ready for the fall. So that's the sort of dance that's happening right now as we try to figure this out. And the reality is it becomes more difficult to pull together the entire faculty and staff after June 17th and before the end of August, right? Everyone's schedules change. People may have summer jobs, like just the availability of everyone changes significantly. So it's hard to do that planning in those months when we may be getting information. So that's why our plan is this spring to engage in some high-level planning so that over the summer, as information evolves, we can lean on some of our teams and our structures that we've built to take that high-level planning and work it out maybe to a finer level of detail as we get that information and as we head toward the fall. And we're just in the early stages of that right now. Mostly at the administrative level, with some input from a few employees, and this will evolve into bringing more and more employees into the fold as we put some structures around how to engage in that work. Krista, and then maybe Kevin.
Is there any sense from the AOE that there will be a point at which a decision will be made? Even understanding that it might be when staff are still contractually not working, families needing to put plans in place based on perhaps a different reality. And have the superintendent's groups talked about, is there a way to put any pressure on by this point we really would advocate for having a decision in place?
Yeah, so there really isn't a lot of clarity about a date by which we will have excuse me, have the information we need to make the decisions. And again, I understand the position, knowing that folks at AOE couldn't possibly say when they know they'll have the public health data necessary to make informed or provide informed guidance. And yes, we're talking as a superintendent's group, like, so how do we wrestle with that? We recognize as leaders of these organizations what it's going to take to operationalize any plan, whichever plan it might be. And so there's a lot of anxiety about having guidance and information in a timely fashion to be able to do that. So yeah, so there's talk about how do we help ensure that we have the information we need when we need it to get this done, because ultimately we're responsible for, you know, the students in our organizations come the start of the school year, whatever that's going to be. Kevin, you had your hand up as well.
So Chris has sort of alluded to it, but a little bit more succinctly, going into this process, I didn't appreciate, and maybe it's a nasty word, but the amount of childcare that the school system provides. Not only education, if you will. So if the school, or as you consider remote learning in the fall or in the future, have you considered, or do you need to consider how to fill that gap where you know, there's hours in the day that students may not have supervision or childcare, or whatever you want to call it, at home, and may not have their best focus?
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's part of the reality of this, and this is something that I've grown to have a little bit clearer understanding of as we approach the fall. My sense is the economy cannot really restart the way I think everyone wants it to be able to restart if schools don't have children in their buildings, because until the kids have a place to go, it's going to be really hard for parents to go back to work. So even if businesses are opening, if we can't take students in, that's going to have a significant impact on the economy getting up and running. So I fully recognize our role in that. You know, it's not our primary mission as an educational institution is not childcare, but it is sort of a byproduct of our primary mission, which is to provide an education to these students. So that's not lost on me. And in fact, that was a big part of our conversation today as an admin team with specifically the elementary age students. And it was a part of our conversation with the high school level as well. I think we have to be prepared to meet the physical distancing guidelines, whatever they might be in the fall, and find a way to have especially our youngest children in our buildings so that the economy can start, right? So a junior in high school probably can be at home by themselves for some extended period of time doing remote learning with hopefully some success. Kindergartner probably can't be at home for any extended period of time and be successful remotely. So there is an emphasis, I think, on making sure that our youngest children, and the question there is, so where's the cutoff? Is it K6, K4, K5, K8, K7? Different people would have different perspectives on that, but we need to be prepared to take in as many of our students as we possibly can, following all the proper guidelines, so that we are doing our part to educate and help the economy get up and going again. And the work between now and then is figuring out So what does that look like? How do we do that? What staff does that take? Are our buildings big enough? I mean, here's a silver lining to declining enrollment, right? We might have enough space in our buildings to bring all of our K-6 kids into them as they currently are structured and spread them out and meet all those guidelines. That's not confirmed yet, but there's a possibility of that being able to happen. And those are the kinds of things that we're trying to figure out right now. Dave?
I wonder, with regard to your considerations of what's going to happen next year, a concern on the part of many throughout the state has been the concern that the remote learning that has taken place thus far has exacerbated the equity differential between students of means and students without means. And is there any evidence that that has happened, that students lacking means have drifted further behind their colleagues that have means? That's one question. And then the other is the concern for special ed students, that it was going to be much more difficult to deal with the needs of special ed students in a remote learning platform. Is that part of your, I presume that's part of your discussion?
It absolutely is, yeah. And I would say this was part of our conversation today too. I think generally speaking, the answer is yes. I think our most vulnerable students, and that can be defined in a few different ways, and it's probably true for almost all cases, that our most vulnerable students are the ones who are struggling with remote learning the most. It's not for sure true across the board in every circumstance. There are some students that are on IEPs, for example, that are thriving. This happens to fit their learning style really well. The flexibility that Hannah and Bella talked about really suits them well. So it's not exclusive, but I think generally speaking, yes, our most vulnerable students are struggling the most with this. So I do think there is an element of exacerbating the inequities that existed prior that we need to wrestle with. And those are some of the conversations we're having. And as we're talking even at a high level about the fall, we're talking about how do we ensure that we're meeting the needs of students that have been disadvantaged mostly by this remote learning, and how to overcome those. So that is I would say that's a primary part of our conversations pretty regularly. And we've explored lots of different options for that. You know, even if we're in a hybrid or in a remote learning situation, is there a way that we ensure that our students who are at greatest risk of not being successful in our model, do we make sure they're in the building every day, even if not all other students are in the building every day, if that's what they need to get support? Really just thinking about whatever it takes to make sure that we're supporting them the way they need to be supported is what our focus is going to be.
Great, thanks.
Sarah.
Yeah, has there been any conversations with any other organizations that we could potentially use some of their facilities, like the Lincoln Library or the Bristol Library, or just to afford us more space for the social distancing?
Yeah, there hasn't been formal conversation yet, but we've discussed that in-house a little bit about thinking differently about space. For example, you know, Holly Hall and Howden Hall in Bristol. You mentioned the library in Lincoln. Like each town probably has some space that, if it were needed, could have some students and some adults in it to just to give us the square footage to get the kind of distancing. And we're actually trying to, this is tricky for everyone, but trying to shift the conversation to really use terms like physical distancing, because when school resumes in the fall, we actually want to encourage socialization. So physically we need them to be 6 feet apart or more, but we want them to socialize as much as possible, because that's a significant aspect of what's missing right now. And there are complications in socialization when kids are in a different building in a different part of the town that we'd have to think through, but it's definitely not off the table as an idea. And we've thought about some other ways to really work the square footage angle as well to create the space we need to bring everyone in. Right now, our building principals are feeling pretty confident that we have the space in the buildings, but we really need to put some clearer numbers to it to see that it's going to work out. Krista?
I was just wondering if you've been able to capture any learning from the essential childcare program and how that has gone as far as keeping kids separate. I know it's mostly younger kids, but I bet there's some best practice, do's and don'ts that have come out of that could be useful moving forward.
I feel like we are always learning from ELP, whether it's their after school care, their summer programming, or now the child care that they've started up. And for sure, we're learning a lot about the do's and don'ts and what works and what won't work, and the staffing levels and some procedural things. So absolutely, we're going to be in great position in that regard, that they've field tested some things. And, it may be a little different when we're trying to scale up from 30 kids to 1,300. But nevertheless, I think we can borrow a lot of what they've learned. For example, even knowing 7 or 8 kids in a room with 2 adults is about what you can have and keep your 6-foot social distancing. So that to procedures for checking temperatures and custodial cleansing, et cetera, are things that I think we can scale up. Trina, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, and in addition to some of those procedural pieces and making sure that the space and the supplies and the mask is all good, it's how do you talk to kids? How do you answer the question, like, why am I wearing a mask? Why do we have a rope that has marked out 6 feet when we go for a walk around town in Bristol, right? So how are we actually having those conversations with kids that feel developmentally appropriate, safe, and backed up by what the parents are saying at home? So I think we can learn a lot from what these folks have been doing for the last 2 months. It's pretty amazing, considering we jumped right in and kind of we're learning on the fly. We have lots of resources, and we have now this actual ground experience to be sharing with teachers.
And kids can grasp the concept. I was talking with a special educator earlier today who happened to be at Bristol last week sometime, I think. And she said she had observed kids out at the playground, and she saw kids in the sandbox 6 feet away from each other. So they're applying what they're hearing and the conversations they're having and the learning from the child care setting and extending that out to the playground. And that's intentional. That's by design, right? So they're talking about, what does this look like on the playground? What if you're in the sandbox? So they don't leave any stone unturned in terms of explaining to students what it looks like in the different environments, but they're getting it and they're doing it, which is great.
And they're still having fun, and they're still laughing, and they're still creating, and they're gardening, and they're building huge ships and having pirate wars. I mean, there's some really amazing things happening in that childcare that, yes, we are thinking all the time about how do we steal this and blow it up, so that we can support more kids.
I'll add one of the scary things we're learning is the financial aspect of the cost to run a program that has the staffing appropriate to accomplish all of these things we were talking about. So that's part of what we're wrestling with as we start to think about bringing kids back and scaling this up, and really trying to understand what's the staffing need going to be as we, maintain the physical distancing and all the other requirements. Thinking about busing, right now it sounds like the guidance would be when we return to transportation that it's 1 student per seat every other seat. So we're looking at buses, instead of holding, potentially 40 students, it might be 15 to 20 students on a bus. And what does that mean? How many more buses might we need? Are parents even going to want to have their kids ride the buses, or are more and more parents going to be driving kids to school so they're not putting their kids on the buses? And So those are some of the logistical and potentially financial considerations that we're working through right now as you try to figure out what might happen in the fall. And really, coming back to Dave Sharp's point about those with means and not. So transportation is a great equalizer, right? If we don't provide transportation, those without are likely the ones to be most impacted and not coming to school. And those with the means to get their kids to school still would. So we still need to figure out transportation. So taking that out of the mix really isn't an option from my perspective. Even if it's complicated and potentially more costly, it's a great equalizer in terms of access to education. So we've got to figure it out. I'm not hearing any others, Don. We're seeing any hands. We're seeing any hands.
Okay, I can't see hands, so I have to rely on you.
I scanned for virtual and actual hands up, and I don't see any.
For virtual and actual hands up, and I don't see any.
Okay. All right. Then let's keep moving along down the discussion around the superintendent authority to set salaries for the administration, and then the policy references are included. Policy 2.7.3 and 3.3.3.
Yeah, and I'll set the context for that. And then happy to turn that over to folks for conversation. So Don and I have been in conversation for a little while now, and this is something we've questioned for a couple of years. The past practice has been for the board to set administrator salaries, and really salaries for folks not covered by the director's policy, the collective bargain, or the either collective bargaining agreement. And that's not the practice in other places who operate under policy governance. So part of what Don and I determined to do at the end of our last meeting was, let's look at our policies and see if the policies shed any light on what the appropriate practice should be in terms of establishing those salaries. And as we did our homework and we checked in with each other ahead of tonight's meeting, we both felt that 2.7.3, which is the executive limitations language, but also 3.3.3, which is the board management and governance, both indicated that it was the superintendent's responsibility to set salaries for, really it lists a lot of different folks and the conditions under which those salaries need to be set, but that it identified the superintendent as the person who had the authority and responsibility for doing that. But because it was it's different in practice from what we have done, Don and I both felt it was important to have a discussion about that tonight, because this would otherwise have been a meeting where we would set those salaries. Typically, the way, and just to sort of talk procedurally how this has happened in the past, effectively, those other salaries that we're talking about tend to follow the collective bargaining settlements. And we just sort of follow suit unless there's a reason to make an adjustment. So if you looked at 2.7.3, I think it was there. It basically says that the superintendent is held accountable by policy to be sure that that salaries don't deviate from, it lists a lot of different things. One of the things it talks about is that it doesn't deviate from the geographic sort of range of salaries that folks might expect for those positions. And so when we find that there's a position that is not consistent with what salaries for the position are getting in the geographic area that we're in, then those have been the times when we have not followed the sort of path that's led by negotiations and strayed from that and offered something different. So that's sort of the story behind this agenda item. Maybe now is a good time to turn it over for some discussion, questions, etc.
So Patrick, how do you see this, assuming we sort of all agreed to move this more in the policy governance path? How would you see this working, either this year or next year?
So as it stands right now, we've not issued contracts for the folks that would be in this group that we're talking about. So again, these are people not covered by the director's policy, not covered by either of the two collective bargaining agreements. So the way this would move forward this year and really for next year, because just given what we're looking at for the potential settlements that are hopefully going to be acted on tonight, we would follow suit with what we're looking at for percent new money from those settlements, more or less. And it gets tricky when settlements don't land on the same percent new money, but we usually have some pretty good guideposts to help point us in the right direction, even if we're a fraction of a percent different.
And would you also follow length of contract?
No, so that would typically, really, we're only talking about the salary aspect of it. The other details in the contract are relatively boilerplate. They're consistent across sort of the groups. Like, so all building principals have similar contract language, and there's a guide when we're taking on a new administrator and where their salary is set. So we try to follow that guide and the guide is intended to help us be consistent regionally and be consistent in-house as well. So there are a number of things that help inform what the salary is set at, but it is pretty specific to the salaries.
I think what I was actually referring to was the length. Like if you set a contract amount this year, would it govern the next 2 years? Because that's
typically not, no. Mostly because of the way most contracts are written for administrators right now. There's the first year of that contract is set, and then there's language that says that the salary would be not less than that year, than what that salary was set at, but it doesn't articulate specifically what it would be. And that just leaves it open because our administrators all have 2-year contract. I think all have 2-year contracts, but they're in different stages of that 2-year contract because of their hire date. So they don't all end their second year in the same year because of that staggered hire date. But they do have 2-year contracts, which is fairly standard across the state to have a 2-year.
But theoretically, you'd have the discretion to either shorten that or lengthen that depending on the particular administrator.
Exactly. Yep. Administrator or circumstance. Again, as we're coming into some really uncertain times, to have that flexibility to set contracts in a way, because again, there's other policy that states that I don't, put the district in financial jeopardy, et cetera. So maintaining some flexibility in terms of the length of contracts to position us to be able to do what we have to do in these uncertain times and talking about facilities, et cetera, becomes really important down the road. Dave?
I can't support such a process. I feel pretty strongly the evidence statewide is that, and I've said this before, I apologize if I sound like a broken record, but Vermont is an outlier in costs for district administration and in-school administration. And I think that administrators typically do a pretty good job, a very good job of managing staff that are under them, but not such a good job in managing the costs of their own office. So this, I couldn't support this. I won't support this.
And it would be important to note the interpretation right now of policy as it's written is that it is the superintendent's authority to do this. So if this is not what the board desires, this would necessitate policy language change. just procedurally in terms of how to go from here. And again, if you looked at 2.7 and was it 2.77 or 2.73 and 3.33, to me, it seems quite clear that it's a very reasonable interpretation under those policies that it's a superintendent's job to set those salaries. So those would be specifically, I think, the policies that would need to be changed. Kevin?
Just to clarify things in my head, I understand that we've got a professional contract and a support staff contract. You mentioned, was it a director agreement or something like that?
Yep, a director's policy, which covers support staff that don't fall under the support staff collective bargaining agreement.
Which is that like, I think I saw that list. It's like the facilities guy and the finance guy and administrative secretaries and all that.
Yeah, so all told, there's probably 40 to 50 people covered under the director's policy. So basically, everyone in central office who's not an administrator is covered under the director's policy. There are some administrative assistants in some schools that are covered by that. There are some custodial folks that are covered by that. Expanded learning program.
So what gap are we filling with this salary group then?
So building principals, assistant principals, central office administrators, IT, I think our athletics and activities director falls under this category. Basically, there's this group of folks that are not covered by those other agreements that we talked about, that each have sort of individual contracts, that each individual contract needs to be renewed annually, typically, and some salary set. So that's the group we're talking about. It's probably the smallest group of all, for sure. I'm hesitant to even wager a guess of how many people we're talking about, but it's not a large number of people.
Just enough to make it confusing.
Yes. You would think with 3 different agreements that would cover everybody, but unfortunately it doesn't.
So Patrick, in reality, you're actually negotiating and handling most of these now anyway, aren't you? I mean, you may bring a question or two to us to sort of get a feel for how you're going to approach it. But my sense is from the last couple of years of being on the board is that you're really doing this already. And frankly, to respond to Dave, I'm not really sure how we would deal with it otherwise. Having just been through the professional staff negotiating process, are we going to then embark on a board managed negotiation process with every administrator? I'm not sure I would be in favor of that.
And historically, the way it has played out, so the last few years on some agenda, typically in that sort of April, May range, the board has, perhaps in a consent, I have to go back and look, approved, we maybe even put this specifically the percent change for folks, or when it was time to make some sort of an adjustment, I would bring sheets of paper to sort of explain to the board the justification behind an adjustment to a salary, and they have been approved. I can't think of a time when it hasn't been approved, because there's usually good reasoning and evidence behind the decision. And in talking that through with Don, just saying, so it seems, it just feels, like it wasn't fitting within the realm of policy governance that I'm doing that work to basically convince the board that what I think ought to happen is something that should happen, which feels more like means than ends, which is what prompted us to go back into policy to see, what does policy say? Does policy say that I should be doing this, or does policy say the board should be doing this? And our interpretation was that the policy suggests that it should be the superintendent. Kristen?
So Dave, I guess my question is, Don, I guess you would have to ask Dave, is he saying that all those people should not get a raise this year? And I wonder how that would affect retention. I mean, we see what happened when our payroll person left. You know, someone that's, any organization knows that when someone's trained and you've put years or months or whatever of training into people, that that's worth a tangible amount of money. So if people leave because they don't get a raise, then you have to do the training again. And so what's that ad that says, you know, priceless, right? So having a good employee that stays for a long, long time is priceless, right? And so I guess if someone, I know I'm not supposed to talk directly to other people, but is Dave proposing that there's no salary increase for that amount of people? And I wondered also if anyone does know what number of people it is, I think that would help with scale. Thank you.
It's probably approaching 20 if I were to sort of put a guess on that. Probably in the mid to upper teens anyway, maybe not quite 20.
Thank you.
And I think when we put this on the agenda, Patrick and I specifically wanted to go to the policy to have the discussion, because it really wasn't about whether people support it or not. It's, in this sense, it was the discussion about whose role is it, and we both looked at the policies on our own before we talked, and we both came back with the same policies that said it really feels like it's a superintendent role and not a board role to determine that piece of it.
And I think the way, you know, thinking about Dave's point, which is a good one, so through policy, but also through adopting a budget, the board gets to set what spending is acceptable. And as superintendent, I have to figure out how to make that spending work within our organization. So if that means needing to manage sort of front office folks, whether it's a building front office or a central front office, then those are things that we need to look at. And in fact, those are things that we continually look at. But that's a way for the board to make sure that the spending that they think is acceptable to taxpayers is within their authority. And then they charge me with making it work. And typically the way it works is board wants to know, what are the implications if this were the number we gave you, what would this mean for, you know, programming for students or other reductions that would be necessary to make this work. And I think that exchange has served us well as we've navigated some pretty tricky financial times, and probably over the past 4 budgets, I bet we've eliminated 50 positions.
So at the risk of responding to another board member, please censor me if I'm speaking incorrectly. But I would say my concern is not the pay of any particular individual, but the number of individuals that are on a staff has been the evidence that I've seen sitting on the House Education Committee. I would ask, what is the problem with the system the way it works right now, with the superintendent bringing a proposal to the board for the board's approval? Has that been problematic in the past or currently?
I would say from my perspective, it's been at least cumbersome. And part of the challenge, and this to some extent, I suppose, applies to negotiations as well. You know, under policy governance, it's sort of the way it works is the board makes clear to me what the ends are that I'm expected to achieve. And then through executive limitations, I can meet those ends in any way that I deem acceptable, as long as I don't violate those executive limitations. And so from that perspective, as we think about employee compensation, to me, that's a means, not an end. And if the board is establishing means, then that feels like that's in violation of the concept of policy governance. That if the board determines means, then it would be unfair to expect the superintendent to achieve the ends and hold that responsibility. So it's sort of that, if I hold the responsibility for achieving the ends, I should be given the flexibility to deliver the means as I see fit, as long as I'm not in violation with the executive limitations. So the big picture, that's a piece of this. And if I'm recommending that we make some change to someone's salary to be competitive regionally, and the board says no, for whatever reason, then I am now at risk in my ability to meet the ends through an action the board took, which was a means action. And the question of should I then be held responsible for not achieving those ends becomes, I think, a valid question. Want me to keep calling on people, Don? I don't know if you're still having technicals. Andrew?
So Don, is this just basically a thumb or a straw poll about like we're fine with the interpretation as it is that the superintendent sets salaries for those folks?
It's more about whether it's a discussion to know, like, are we all still in agreement that that's the correct interpretation, or should we be looking again at the policy to decide it's not the interpretation and maybe we should look at the policy and like maybe our policy isn't clear enough.
Okay, because it sounds like the policy is pretty much clear that the superintendent, that's his role, and it seems like just from a larger overview of policy governance is like if we start getting into that, then it sounds like we have some questions about the policy governance model as a whole. If we're gonna buy into it, let's stick with it, right? And we may not individually like administrator salaries or the number of administrators or whatever, but our control ultimately is the budget target we set, and then the taxpayer ultimately votes it for it or not. So there is some backstop in there. So I'm fine with moving ahead as is.
Steve, and then Caleb has his hand up.
So also there's just the matter of logistics and fairness. I mean, if you're bringing a couple of people who you need to renew to us kind of as an ad hoc way, what do you feel about this? But you're not bringing everybody to us, then that's not consistent. That falls under this category. And if we were going to move in the direction of the board taking more responsibility for it, then we would need to instigate some kind of process, I think, that would be like what we just went through with the union representative groups. It's a little bit strange in that the same discussion possibly could happen with those union represented groups. That's kind of almost the same thing, but this group doesn't have a union. So by default, we'd almost have to negotiate with each one of these people separately if it wasn't something being done by Patrick.
And some of this is a rub between statute and policy governance, right? So as Val has stated in the past, and Val's maybe not a name that is ringing familiar to everybody here, but I bet most people, Val Gardner, well-known, well-respected educational leader in the state of Vermont, a real guru of policy governance, and has supported this board for many years in its growth and implementation of policy governance. I can remember Val saying that in purely policy governance, the board would have no role in negotiations, but we happen to have statute that says that it's a contract between the Board of Education and the teachers union, the local union. And so that's what brings the board involvement in. but a large part of negotiations for those that haven't been a part of it, there's a heavy lean on Katrina and I as representatives of the organization and as employees to the board to bring that knowledge and facilitate those negotiations. So that's the way we've handled negotiations, to be compliant with statutory requirements, but also to reflect the realities of sort of operating the organization.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I mean, Don, you have the historical knowledge, and probably Kristen and others who had been on the board way back when, right? When before policy governance, or when only some schools were employing policy governance, how were these admin and director contracts talked about at the board level?
Back then, I mean, there was the union negotiations, and then there was the board of directors policy. That was it. So way back when Evelyn was there, she handled it all, came and said, these people are working just as hard as the union people, and there was this sort of discussion, and everybody got the same. And as the union spread out more, like, it opened more holes where people weren't considered part of that group, or a couple were at one place and they weren't at another. So it just became where everybody else landed, and we treated them all the same.
Right. So even before my point, thank you.
Right. So even before my point, thank you.
That was checking my memory, because I feel like even before full-on policy governance, it was still the superintendent's recommendation in terms of how to handle the contracts for the admin/directors who didn't fit in any of the collective bargaining agreements or the director's policy.
Caleb, I see your hand is still up.
Yeah. So appreciate the discussion, and I basically agree with this interpretation and don't have an argument with that. I do think that, as Patrick points out, we've got this fairly significant division between ends and means, which is important, but that I think does make it incumbent upon the board to be responsible for those ends and to attend to them annually, and not to just let them become a static document. I think there's an inherent challenge, because with some of our ends policies, we know they're aspirational. We've talked about this. It's impossible for Patrick to succeed with some of our educational ends policies. And we've talked about the fact that we kind of want it that way. At the same time, we looked at scores last year and Patrick reported non-compliance. And I don't think that in that case, we want to weaken our ends standard necessarily. We also don't want to have our superintendent feel constantly out of compliance with that very core educational ends policy. Now, this one is a little different, is a little bit more logistical, but I think that it's, like, as I say, incumbent on us to look at our ends policies as a living document and say, well, which of these policies do we know are aspirational, and which of these policies are not aspirational? They are the letter of our expectation, and to measure them differently. I don't have an easy answer for that, but I think that when we feel like we're banging our heads against the policy governance structure, I tend to come back to, we've got to get more fluency with our side of the equation, which is the ends, and not as a way of beating Patrick or any of our administrators over the head with those things, but as a way to bring clarity for ourselves and for our constituents. So I just throw that out there.
And I certainly appreciate that, Caleb. What was coming to mind for me as you were talking just now, if I think about just in this meeting tonight, the time we've spent talking about the work that's happening that's sort of means related around COVID-19 and remote learning and what the fall looks like, and now about this administrator's salary, I struggle to remember a meeting where we spent even this much time talking about the ends since October, when we had the ends policy monitoring report. So that just that idea of freeing up board time, which is precious time, from conversations around means to enable the board to focus on the depths of the ends. The depths of that ends policy are great. And I think that would be a place where the board would do well to spend a lot of its time. Krista, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think Caleb probably said it more eloquently than me, but I was thinking when we get mired in these sorts of means conversations, I think sometimes it is a symptom of the board feeling like we don't have a big enough grasp on the connection to the ends, or perhaps we're hearing something in our community values that we're not sure where the connection is. So it's not that we want to make those clearly executive decisions for you or for whomever is the superintendent, but that we are lacking the confidence in how that relates to the bigger picture at the end of the day. And so I think that is our challenge in our work, and maybe it, our ends monitoring is, not necessarily as robust as we want it to be in certain areas.
I think that's a great point, Krista, about the community values. And I'm thinking about the tool that that Sue helped create that could be a great guidepost for some of this. And I also acknowledge there's something fairly concrete about means that can feel like we're accomplishing something and we can wrap our head around. The ends tend to be a lot more obscure and harder to wrap our head around, which is a part of, I think, what's so appealing about talking about means. So I appreciate that. I acknowledge that. It would encourage us to focus more on ends, because that's ultimately, at the end of the day, what matters.
I agree.
Krista has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. If I could just add one more thing, I think, it's less satisfying sometimes to talk about the ends, but I think we also feel a responsibility to our community if we, it's not just that it's less satisfying. I think it's that we feel a lot of pressure as representatives of our community sitting on the board to not have any connection at all with that. And so right now, maybe we're 5 steps away from the means, when it would feel a little better for us and for our community if we were a little closer. So, yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I'm dying to interject only because, Krista, when you were on my parent advisory group at Bristol Elementary School, we had these conversations. What takeaway statements or factoids or celebrations can you as board members hold on to, that when you bump into somebody on the street, I mean, I know we're not bumping into anybody right now, but when you are with people, you have like something to hold on to that you feel confident you can say, right? So what are some of those factoids? Like, we're actually working really hard on XYZ, and you feel confident about saying that. We're doing that a little bit better as an admin team also. Like, what are we at a place where we feel like we're ready to share as a district, versus where are we still getting more information, versus what are we still like working on, right? But I feel like even back then when you were on my parent group, we were really looking for some statements that you as a parent, or now as a board member, you had something you could like, just something you could hold your hat on, right? You'd hang your hat on. You could say to people, and you wouldn't necessarily be lying, or you wouldn't be so aspirational that people are like, blah, blah, blah. Like, so what are some things as a board we can be helping provide you to help with that kind of language, I guess, is what I'm thinking about right now.
Don? I think there's a hand.
I'm sorry, I can't find the raise my hand thing. But one of my thought is, having this discussion is part of growing to the next step, because if we don't actually have a discussion together to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're all realizing this is means. If we don't have these discussions, we won't get to the next level to get to that better understanding. It's all part of the growing process. You learn a little more each time. You experience something new. You do something new. So I think it's important, whether it doesn't feel very satisfying, to think that we're not getting to the ends where to have these big discussions. We are getting closer in every step that we take.
And I would add to that, as we're thinking about policy, and I think
So I
your
think
point
if
is
we're
well taken,
not getting to the
Krista, in
ends,
terms of the board feeling closer to the work. 2.8 is an executive limitation, and it's about communication and support to the board. So that's a place where you can hold me accountable for making sure you have the information that you feel you need to be responsive to the folks that are in the community that you're feeling that pressure from. And I certainly work to support the board in that way. But if there's something lacking in my communication or support to the board to give you that information, absolutely. That can happen beyond just the once a year we look at the monitoring report for 2.8. That can be ongoing. At every board meeting, we can talk about what information did you not get that you wished you had, or in anticipation of something coming up, what information would you want? But I'm happy to have those conversations every meeting so that I'm making sure that I'm getting you what you need. Dave?
So I really look forward to a board agenda that has, that's all about ends. Things like, we want to see 95% of our children in third grade are with their peers. Because we know that if they're not with their peers in math and reading by third grade, the chances of them being successful and graduating from high school and going on to be successful citizens is greatly diminished. So yes, let's talk about that. And then let's talk about what are the consequences to the system, which is, I don't know how you're going to describe that, but what are the consequences to the system if you're not reaching that goal?
So can I do a clarity check? Because there's some action that needs to follow this on my part, I think, and potentially some action for the board to consider at a future agenda item, depending on how this goes. As I understand it currently, my interpretation is that this is my authority to set these contracts that we need to do before the next board meeting, because it's that time of year and they're not currently set, and that I have the authority to do that. And the board has the authority to change that authority through changing policy. Is that an accurate read of where we sit as of right now? I see a couple of thumbs. Okay. I think that gets what I need to move forward and take care of business.
Okay. All right, we'll keep moving on. Next is an action item to accept the monitoring report for 4.6 board committee structure. Is there a motion?
So moved, Sarah McLean.
Okay. A second?
I second Caleb Elder.
Any discussion? Okay. So let me ask, I don't see any virtual hands. I can't see them so in person. So if somebody's got a virtual hand, somebody has to tell me.
I don't see any now.
All right. So okay, based on the information provided, does the board find that the interpretation is reasonable? Thumbs up, yes. Thumbs down, no. Can you tell Patrick? I can't see anything.
I saw thumbs. I did not see any thumbs down.
I saw thumbs. I did not see any thumbs down.
Okay.
I do see one thumbs down, sorry.
Oh, I do see one thumbs down, sorry.
Okay. Okay. Based on the information provided, does the board find that the data demonstrates the accomplishment of this interpretation? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no.
I'm seeing hands raised. Thumbs up. I don't see any thumbs down.
Okay. All right. So all those in favor of accepting the monitoring report for 4.6 board committee structure, please say aye.
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 Okay. All right. Next is an action item to determine the date and location and possible topics for the retreat agenda. It is possible for the dates that we'll do a doodle poll, and unless there's an objection, we could start with our usual month of August.
And I can share a little bit about and see if that's helpful to advance this conversation. So in the past, so the last 2 years, it was August 14th of 2018 and August 15th of 2019 that the board held its retreat. So if it feels like that window of time, more or less, is working well, then we can work to put out a doodle poll for that week, landing somewhere probably around that August 13th date. August 13th is a Thursday. I'm assuming we maybe want to avoid a Monday or a Friday. I think we've tried to do that in the past, kind of pick a middle of the week kind of time. So maybe we can just check on that concept of dates. Thumbs if that feels like that's something that could work. Okay, more or less. I don't see any thumbs down, at least. So we'll give that a shot. Location, we've been at Zeno Mountain for the last couple of years. I feel like it's worked really well for us from my perspective. And obviously the big question this year is, do we want to attempt an in-person social distancing style meeting, which is possible, I think, at Zeno, given the space that we have there? Or would you want a virtual sort of Zoom kind of retreat? Annie?
Are we talking about like an all day thing? Or are we talking about like a couple hours? Or what are we talking about here for time?
Closer to all day than a couple of hours. I think 9 to 4-ish, give or take, is what we've done historically, with some lunch and breaks and things built in.
Okay, I'm taking back my thumbs up on the middle of the week thing then, because I work full time all day. So I'm taking back my thumbs up on that.
Okay. Sarah, and then I saw Krista as well, I think.
I would like to try to do it in person, socially distanced. I mean, if it's a nice day at Zeno, the possibilities are endless. Or at least partially in person. It's a long day. I mean, I think when you say 9 to 4, that's ambitious. I think we're usually not out of there. Well, because then there's a board meeting after the retreat. So we're out of there at like 6 or later. Yeah, so it's a long day. And I think, yeah, just being together would be good. And, I mean, like, we're trying to get the schools to be in person, and I don't know, I think we can try just a group of adults to be in person.
Krista, I thought I saw a hand earlier.
Ditto. I can't imagine doing an all-day Zoom. I think that would be fairly torturous and not that productive.
Are you saying you're not in favor of an all-day Zoom? I couldn't hear that.
Sorry, in person, please, if possible. Or several days of shorter Zoom meetings on similar topics, but an all-day Zoom, I think, would be a really bad idea.
I wonder if we could just maybe do some thumbs and see how folks are feeling about an in-person retreat, at least for a good portion of the day, if not the entire day. All right, I'm seeing pretty much exclusively thumbs up there. Caleb and Liz, feel free to give a hands up if that, okay, I see a hands up from Caleb. Okay, so in person, good. And let's check Zeno. Do folks feel like Zeno is a place that we're still happy with and we want to keep it there? Great. I'm seeing thumbs up on that. Now maybe we can talk about possible topics. I came up with a few, but there are obviously others. So some of the things that I was wondering about for topics were, I think, our facilities conversation.
Don, can you mute yourself, Don?
I think continuing our facilities conversation, I don't know what information we'll have from the study that's going on there, but certainly within central office, we'll be doing some crunching ourselves in terms of finances and whatnot. So I think it's worth an agenda item to have on facilities, whichever level of information we can bring to that. I also think, you know, the facilities study committee will have met for several months at that point, and can be a big part of that retreat day. And obviously thinking about the work, how that ties into the community engagement committee, that topic feels like it's worthwhile for an agenda item. Related to that, finances, you know, we'll have hopefully some sort of a forecast with a little more accuracy than what we have right now as we get into August, which obviously finances relates to the facilities conversation, but there's more to it than facilities. We obviously hopefully will have some much clearer plans about the fall at that point in time. So that can be a 2.8 communication to the board, let you know where those plans are at that point in time. And community engagement in general, I think, is something that is worthy of continuing to think about, both in terms of the fall and what kind of community engagement is planned for that, but also community engagement in general. If there are ways that, you know, whether it's the community councils that aren't necessarily off the ground yet, or something else. So that was an idea. And policy governance, I know everyone has access to the board accelerator training right now, and there may be a role to at least check in, or maybe it will be completed by that date. So those were the ones that were on my mind: facilities, finances, fall planning, policy governance, community engagement.
So isn't facilities all about means?
There's an aspect of it that's about means, for sure. But in terms of any vote of the electorate, there is a responsibility on the board's part to determine what, if anything, gets put before the electorate that would involve implications on the school, whether it's closing or repurposing in terms of how our articles of agreement are currently written for how we operate. So there's definitely means, but there is board action required to take it to the next level to make changes to those, because of statute and our articles of agreement. Do any of those sound like, oh, Katrina has something to add? Go ahead, Katrina.
I just wonder if a small amount of time during the retreat might be timely in thinking about what type of data will be accessible and have to be massaged to inform your ends monitoring report for October, given how different the spring is. So we won't have SBAC data. We won't have our end of the year assessment data that you typically have to inform your report. So I would love to have a few minutes just to, we will talk about it internally, of course, but from the board's perspective, in the absence of your typical data, how else might we be able to inform you as it relates to our progress towards the ends?
It might be helpful to look back at some of the things we were looking for last fall. So I think we're more locally based anyway, and just see what opportunities there are for plugging some of that in.
So were any of those topics that felt like were not topics we should include on an agenda for the retreat? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Are there topics that I didn't mention that are topics that you think should be included on an agenda for the retreat? Krista?
Is there a way to weave in any, I don't know if there'll be able to be any updates provided to the strategic plan, but that I think would be really helpful.
Even if it's just about how are we going to get back on track with that work.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great connection to the ends, which is a good thing to have, make sure there's time for.
is there room to add things? Because 3 months away is a long time right now. So is there a way to add stuff as we kind of go along, if we can make it happen by that date?
Absolutely. From my perspective, yes. I think the trick with this sometimes is if we're trying to secure a trainer or someone to come in and help, now's the time when we really need to make sure that we're reaching out and securing a date for folks. In the past, we've had someone come from VSBA to provide training around governance. Val Gardner has come to provide training around governance. Last year we had Rebecca Haslam come and talk with us. I think it was last year, come and talk with us about sort of equity.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias, right.
Right, she was great.
She was great. And if those are all things we could have on this agenda as well, and I can certainly reach out to folks and try and pin down a date with them. And sometimes their availability drives a little bit about when our retreat date lands too. So I haven't heard anything, with the exception of the policy governance potentially. There's the board accelerator work, but there are folks that we could reach out to see if they'd be available to come for a portion of that retreat to offer support. Forgetting the woman's name, but a woman that Don and I have been in communication with around the board accelerator program. I think she is available for hire to come and provide that kind of support in person. So we could look at that.
It's Sue Mogenson?
Yep.
Another Sue.
Is anyone feeling like we would benefit or from bringing someone in to help with any of these? We could talk, depending on what we wanted to accomplish from a community engagement perspective, we could keep Sue in mind. If there's anything there that we think she could help us through. And we might be able to talk more, Krista, as the chair of the community engagement subcommittee, about what you might envision or what that committee might envision using our time for on a retreat date. And then we can see if that's something that makes sense to loop Sue into. And we can even talk with Sue about whatever that might be. So we could bring in Sue McCormick, Sue that Don just mentioned, I forgot that name already, and possibly Sue from the VSBA. We could have a day of Sues covering a range of topics for us. And we'd remember all of their names, which is wonderful.
I think Sarah's right. If we could mimic what the start of the school year will look like, including, food and distancing and all that, I think that would be, we got to practice what you're going to do, right? Or sort of thing. So, and to lay that out, because hopefully by then we would know more about that, what that's going to look like.
We could also possibly bring in someone from NESDEC if that felt applicable for the facilities conversation, depending on what level of work they've completed by then. And I can work with Kevin and the facilities group around what that might look like and what might make sense there. So that's starting to feel like, if I partner with Kevin around how can we allocate some time around the facilities piece and what resources we bring in to support that, maybe that makes some sense. Partner with Krista around the community engagement component. And there's going to be opportunities for the three of us to be talking about this together between now and then. And we can try to make sure that an agenda flows well, given the relationship between the two. And then maybe Sue for policy governance. That starts to feel like things are coming into place and we can bring in resources to support that work. Is that all sounding okay to folks? Sarah?
Yeah, and that sounds great. I'm wondering if, like, just to plant a little seed, if we could somehow have some of the conversation around community engagement, both reflection of where we've been and also looking forward to where we're going, and how what we've learned, specifically just talking about core values and how we're applying that, or how they currently are applied to our ends policies. And I know that that's like probably a really huge conversation, but yeah, just an idea.
No, I think that's a good idea. And I think that's applicable to Katrina's comment about what's the data we're looking for. I think the fact that we have those core values can help inform the data that we look to to embed in the ends policy. So I think weaving core values with the ends language and the ends interpretation and the data we have available and the feedback from last year's ends monitoring report, that's starting to give some shape to what the ends monitoring report could look like and what some conversations at our retreat could be. Kevin.
I don't expect anything to become of this, but the whole finances was sort of brought up, but there's this bigger issue of taxpayer mood, along with the challenge of facilities. It's a very complex issue, and it probably can't be solved even in a one-day retreat, regardless of gathering a semblance of information, but it's going to become very complex for the next voting or budget cycle.
Yeah, and I think even a conversation to deepen our understanding or thinking around that idea is really valuable, because that's the mood is what's going to show up at the polls, right? For whenever and whatever they're being asked to vote on. So that pulse in the community, I think, is really critical and ties together a lot of the conversations that are going to be surfacing at our retreat. And what's happening regionally versus what's happening statewide, and what's the relationship there, and potentially nationally. I think they all impact that. That's a great topic. Generally, the taxpayer mood is we don't want to pay any more taxes. I think we can work from that. Well, and I think that now these are several hours and all-day events. Do we want to come back to, Annie, you mentioned a concern about the date. Do we want to revisit that, or let something surface in a doodle poll? Maybe we can include a Saturday date in the doodle poll in that same window of time and see if that's what more people prefer.
If we're getting back to date, I am wondering if an earlier date than is traditional would be appropriate, just given the very unusual fiscal year into which we are entering. And not that we need to, I don't want to derail the regular scheduling of the typical retreat time, but I don't know, I think that when you talk about voter sentiment, there's a number of towns going to vote today and very soon, and people talk about, well, you know, it is kind of crazy that we shut down the schools in the sequence and voted budgets, and just the way that all of that was interlocked with the various COVID stages at the beginning is pretty crazy. And how some districts are kind of voting in this different feeling time. But in our case, we've got this budget voted on, and it's something I just think that our board should kind of talk about what that means and to our community. And I think I look at it as an opportunity in a lot of ways. That we know we are our community's approval for that money, but we also know that they're watching closely how we're spending it if it's going to be potentially really different. And so maybe even meeting sooner than a couple months into the new fiscal year would be something we'd consider.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely worth considering. I think the trick with it is the later the summer the retreat, the more information we're going to have to inform the conversation. Only then it's later in the game and harder to plan long, for the more immediate need. Yeah, it's some of it's about what do we want to accomplish at the end of the retreat, and is that better done early with less information or later with more information potentially?
I think we should just put the dates out through the doodle poll and just see what surfaces amongst everybody, and because we have a few more things to get through tonight, and there's a great outline for the topics, and we can just work on the date online.
Do you want me to put out an early to middle July series of dates as well, in light of what Caleb just offered, or stick with the middle of August range? Setting up the doodle polls easy, so that's, if that feels okay, I can do a sort of, and
Yeah, I don't think it hurts just to put July dates in and no one picks them. That's fine.
then we'll see where we go. Okay. And it'll be important to note, I guess, what I may actually ask Jennifer to do is give you all some time to think about it. And the first question might be, do you want to retreat in early to middle July or early to middle August? And then with that information, we'll send a doodle poll. Because if I send a doodle poll that has a few dates in early to middle July and a few dates in early to middle August, and it's possible that I get inconclusive information about when people actually want to meet. So I want to make sure that I'm getting something more conclusive. So
could we get late June as an option as well? Is that too crazy?
I redefine what too crazy is in light of COVID-19. I don't think anything's too crazy. That is by far, that's not the craziest thing I've heard today.
Right, and I don't want to add to the complication either, but it may also be a consideration to tease out the full day agenda might actually be more productive in 2 half days. So if part of the agenda is to be a training in policy governance or community engagement, maybe that happens separate from board business. And we're actually looking at a July date and an August date, potentially, that are 2 half days versus an entirely huge 8-hour day. I'll be there no matter what, just saying, but putting it out there.
I'd be all in favor of putting the board meeting on a different date. I think that's that really takes a little bit of the excitement out of what we accomplished earlier in the day usually. And having been on the negotiating committee for quite a long time now, I'm not really excited about a meeting in June. I could use a break, so.
Okay, so I've heard late June, mid-July, and mid-August, possibly all of them, but shorter meetings. I'm not exactly sure how to get a read from the board on what you want. I will make any of those work. I just need to know what the will of the board is, and I'm not sure how to get it right now.
So I just want to add that traditionally, there were no board meetings in July when the superintendent used to have 8 a month. So that's why I think it was always in August. There were like none, and it was hard to, because people were on vacation, it was hard to get people together anyway. I mean, this year that might not be a problem. So that's just why I think it was always in August, like 0. July was like the big 0.
And
people
that was
scatter in July, that is true.
That was the agreement with the administrative team too. So if you want the administrative team to be present, the agreement, the gentleman's agreement way back when was you don't touch July. But things have changed.
So how about this? Maybe we'll do some thumbs on some concepts, and that'll point me in a direction that'll be helpful. Who would like 3 shorter meetings spread out between June, July, and August? Thumbs up on that idea. Okay. I'm not seeing a lot of thumbs for that idea. Who would like 2 shorter meetings, 1 in July, 1 in August? More or less half days. Okay. A little warmer on that one. Who would like 1 day, like we have done it historically, in middle of August? All right.
Can I put a suggestion for 2 meetings in August?
Okay, so far the 2 meeting idea I got the warmest reaction to, although nothing's burning me up yet, but that was the warmest reaction so far, was 2 meetings. So
can I put in a suggestion for 2 meetings in August?
So let's check these 2 ideas. 1 meeting in July, 1 meeting in August. And the other option will be 2 meetings in August. So let's check thumbs on 1 meeting in July, 1 meeting in August. I'm seeing 2 up and 4 sideways. How about 2 meetings in August? Ooh, a thumbs down, but a lot more thumbs up. Krista, could you live with it? You have a thumbs down right now, which would indicate that you can't live with it. Let's talk it through.
I could live with it. I think I like the idea of spreading things out a little bit more. And then also, you didn't ask me this, but since I've unmuted, I'm going to just also say that in general, I think I like the idea. I feel like we are always really pressed and really go long with topics that, like a budget topic, needs a lot of time. So I do like the idea of maybe having to separating that out. If it ends up both being in August, it's not a deal breaker for me, but I am going to be away for one of the weeks in August.
Okay, so maybe 2 in August, and we try to give some time in between, and then it's obviously the challenge of working around schedules when people are available or not. Okay.
I was primarily just thinking, you know, do the retreat one day and then do a regular board meeting some other night.
Okay. So give me a big thumbs down right now if you can't live with 2 dates in August. Okay, we'll work to find the dates now and strategize, as Krista said, about what goes in which one of those dates to try and, yeah, trying to shorten the day and then have the heavy topics all on the same day would be tricky. Okay.
Okay.
I have what I need.
All right, we'll get moving along. We have update and negotiations, but we're going to sort of get that later, so I'm going to just keep moving along past that one. Update from the Community Engagement Committee. Krista, you have a little something to say?
Sure, you can see our minutes there. We're meeting tomorrow evening. I guess the 2 big highlights that we're talking about right now are talking about Patrick sharing a kind of district-wide end of the year update, wrap up, thin engagement, sort of here's what we've learned, here's what we know moving forward. And then the other thing that we are talking about is bringing together people other than just school board members. So town leaders, whether they're officially elected or not, to be part of the bigger conversations of the challenges that our schools are facing that also are probably similar to challenges being faced in our communities in a lot of ways. So beginning stages of those conversations. So I don't think I'll add much more detail until after our meeting tomorrow. But Patrick, I don't know if you wanted to share with this full group any progress on the first piece.
Yeah, so not a lot of progress at this point. Really trying to kind of sketch out the concepts that we want to address. I have talked with the admin team about what kind of message we want to send. So the idea right now is sort of almost like a town hall kind of video recording that's shared out, that's talking about what we've learned, what little bit we can share about what we know moving forward, and mostly the message being about we're on it, like we're here, we're supporting you, we care, we're working on this, and whatever it takes, we're going to make it work well for everyone. And wanting to balance that messaging with hearing multiple voices from leadership in MAUSD. So building principals, other central office leaders, so more than my voice in the video. The idea right now is something like a fairly staged Zoom call like this, where we hit record and various people get a chance to speak and their face seen and voices heard as we help reassure people that we're working on this and we're doing everything we can to make the most of the situation. So that's the gist of it at this point.
Can I just add one thing to that? That I think the group was talking about as well, is that it's okay to have uncertainty around what's next, and just share that with folks as well, that there's a concern about not having, connecting with folks when we don't know all the answers. But I think the consensus among the group was that people would like to hear from our educational leaders, even though they don't have all the answers. And even just hearing that they don't have all the answers is okay. That there's a really important role that our educational leaders play in the community. And the more contact we as a community can have with those leaders, I think the better people feel, even when there aren't really concrete answers.
I wonder if it would be helpful for this board or the district, I don't know, to have a policy around COVID, knowing that, COVID will be around our schools in the coming year to some degree, or there's a high likelihood. And just though we don't know exactly what's going to happen, I think it's a case for having a clearly articulated policy that kind of builds on what's already happened might be helpful, and might be really a stabilizing kind of local policy that's just sort of known ahead of time. Here's what happens if, just sort of COVID protocols, I suppose. And it seems that with our community engagement, if we were going to have some sort of board response to COVID or district response, this would probably be a good time to do that, and to maybe even talk about an idea like that at this type of thin engagement you're talking about. And I don't know, that's too specific or on the nose, but.
Katrina, I saw your hand for a minute, and that was.
Yeah, I wonder, I was first thinking about Krista, and then a little bit of what Caleb just said. Is it a district leadership outreach, or is it a board outreach? Like would the taxpayers and the community feel that sense of relief to know people are watching out for them from their peer group, you as stakeholders that they elected to the board, versus the employees of us? I'm just wondering, where is that balance? And maybe it's a collaborative, as I think Caleb was just starting to get to.
Well, I think people like to hear from what they consider to be experts, and maybe we could help with that. But I think that there's, I guess the word at this time is solace in hearing from people who seem to have information in our leaders. So I would say maybe both, but certainly I think there's value in you guys doing something, not to give you more work or anything, but
yeah.
Well,
concentrating it is not a bad thing.
Right, and I wasn't trying to usurp any work, believe me. I was more thinking about where's the actual, where are we missing? Because we as ed leaders, as principals, as district leaders, as teachers are outreaching like crazy. We're still missing a component of people. Might we reach some of those folks through your avenues? I'm not sure.
Well, I'm wondering, as you're talking, Katrina, really perhaps the potential is words of support from the board for the work we're doing as a district in helping to meet the needs of the community. And I think that helps keep the means and ends and relationship piece clear as well, to not offer, to not further muddy the waters that are somewhat muddy already in terms of everyone's understanding about how policy governance works and who does what. But the idea that we're having these conversations, we are working together in support of our community from an educational perspective, yes, but well beyond education. And that we're supporting one another through this as we work to support our community probably is a message that we want to convey.
I think it would be a really valuable affirmation from the board. I think it's really well said. And that's kind of what I had in mind. It's sort of more like describing what you've done or what has been done is giving a reassurance that this is going to happen again in the future, because there is a lot of uncertainty. And I think the fact that our district is deploying our school budget in new and flexible and imaginative and necessary ways is something that people, anyway, I want to have the opportunity to sort of formalize support for that, for sure, going into this year.
So I'm wondering, operationally then, if I sketch out not so much a script as much as a sort of conceptual frame of school leaders, inclusive of school board in its entirety, or a representation from school board, as well as building leaders and district leaders, and that we collectively as a leadership team send this message in a style like this. So it would be a recording of a bunch of faces on a screen like this, delivering that kind of message, hearing voices of board members, central office administrators and building administrators, and seeing as many faces up on that screen saying, we've got this. Does that feel like that's a good way to go? Okay. I'll factor that into my planning. And so I'll sketch that out, and maybe I can work with the Community Engagement Committee as that sketch gets a little bit clearer as a sounding board to the messaging that we're looking for, since the idea originated there. Does that feel appropriate, Krista? Okay. Great. That'll be in the next couple of weeks. We try to put that together and have that ready to go for the end of the year. The end of the year, I'll soon know closer than it was when we started this idea.
So one thing, that committee has people that aren't on the school board on it. And so I think some things are appropriate for board members to present to the community, and some things are appropriate for a mix of people to present to the community. But this feels more like something that's more important for, for this group to present to the community. So I don't know how, I mean, presenting it to the Community Engagement Committee would I don't know, because it's sort of it's your presentation, and we don't need to run it by the community to make the presentation that you're making and we're making. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I think we all probably have some input from people already in our communities about what they want. For instance, I found that I have mostly been clarifying either on Front Porch Forum or the Facebook page for Moncton, or presenting your, back at the beginning of this, Patrick, your messages to the community and putting it on that forum so hundreds of people could see it, because they're not maybe on the district web Facebook page or whatever. And people were like, yes, we want information, we want to know what's going on. And then some things have come up where people made, misstatements such as, oh, the school budget is getting revoted. And so I just gave some information saying, well, that's not the case, because now dozens of people are going off and talking about that, and that's not a thing. So, anyway, that's just one of my concerns, I guess, about that committee, is not muddying what is our work and then what is work we can do with people from the community at the same time. So it's just a thought.
I have to appreciate that comment, Kristen, because it is sometimes unclear, right? I mean, as a Moncton resident, this is me not talking as assistant superintendent. I always appreciate your clarifications, Dawn, here at Moncton, like that you are out there and you are showing those links. And I agree with you. It may be unclear to the folks who don't have kids in the system or who aren't, getting communications from the school to understand why now is this person sharing this information. So yeah, if I'm interpreting what you're saying, a tighter sort of communication group out of the board or the district office seems cleaner than adding more other community members, if that's what I'm hearing you say. I would agree with that.
And for clarity, I wasn't suggesting that the Community Engagement Committee be on the recording. so much as the place where the concept of messaging originated, for them to hear what the plan is and see if that conveys the message was all I was thinking. That it would be exclusively board members and building leaders that would be, and central office leaders that would be on the actual recording. But that, does this message convey what the community engagement committee is saying the community wants to hear? Just as a sounding board. And I don't disagree, Kristen, with your point that the board could also provide that sounding board because of your connection to the community as well. The idea is, I just want someone to bounce my thinking off and saying, is this the message that we're trying to send? Did we get that message across and what the plan is?
And I would just add that
this is possible in our recording.
I would just add that there aren't a lot of parents on that committee except for us. So bringing, parents into it and finding out what they want to hear. I think there is a time when it's more valuable to hear that constituency than even other people who don't have kids in the school. And this might be a time where that's the voices that I want to hear, because those are the people sort of suffering through this, if you will, and not people who are not connected to students at this time. Just my opinion, but for what it's worth.
Yeah, I don't have a strong preference either way who the sounding board is to check the message that we're trying to send. I think both groups could offer something.
I would just say that it would be great to have something go out sooner rather than later, whatever is the easiest to make happen, the most convenient, would be great. The charge of the committee is to think about how to ensure we are sharing input out to and getting input in from the community. That doesn't mean that group is not in charge of the messaging. It's just more planning for or thinking of ideas that would help ensure those things happen. And we have a representative of board members on the committee and community members. And I think everybody's voice, regardless of what role you sit on, is valuable.
Okay, I think I have what I need to move that forward.
Okay, keep moving along. Update from the Facilities Feasibility Study Subcommittee. Kevin, that's you.
I'll unmute. So we had our first meeting earlier this month, and it was primarily organizational, and we did also have Patrick bring us up to speed. We've got an interesting mix. We've got administration, we've got board members who have put in a lot of hours and a lot of thoughts to this, but we also got two community members that have had some level of activity, but not nearly the level of activity that the board and administrative members of it have. So we took the first meeting we had to kind of like go through some background information and kind of talk about the vision. And that pretty much filled up an hour and a half of our hour meeting. That's where we're at. We've got another meeting first week in June. I think it's June 1st it is June 1st at 3 p.m. We're going to be talking a little bit about community values. Sue McCormick's matrix, if you will, or guide sheet. We'll be discussing that, trying to look at understanding some decision-making processes associated with that. And then Patrick is reaching out to the consultants to see when they could show up via Zoom, obviously, and do a little introduction so we could get a little discussion going with them as well. So that's what we're planning for this coming meeting. That's it.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Kevin, you want to take the legislative update too? You have anything else to add?
Okay, I did send out some highlights, and I hurriedly sent them out because as the days were going by in that week, things were radically changing, and it was like not even last week's news, it was last month's news. There's a couple things. So there was some description of legislative activity or inactivity, but there's a couple things, particularly with the board itself, that are worth highlighting. One is we're starting to go through a process of soliciting resolutions from the various board members, if you will. There's been an email sent out, and there'll be some further communications. So if we as a board are interested in influencing any sort of policy changes or not, we should be given that consideration. And I think the committee will be getting together in July, if I remember right, to start reviewing submissions to the resolutions. The other thing of note is there's been a communications committee formed, and there's two activities, I guess you could say, that they're sort of charged with. One is, and it doesn't affect the Addison region, but there's been a lot of realignment of regions throughout the state. So there's also accompanied realignment of reps to get things going and getting seats filled and sorted out and terms sorted out and all that sort of stuff. So there's been some interest in making sure that we know who is interested in re-upping for re-election and where the empty spots are and where the conflicts are. Also, there is, and VSBA is very sensitive to some comments and some actions of some members regarding Act 46. The VSBA did take a stand late in the game during the legislative process when they were deciding, I think it was last fall or whenever it was, trying to decide whether to allow districts to remain in court or if the legislature would, and they ultimately chose to say, no, it's time to go and move forward with the forced merges of the districts that didn't voluntarily merge. And that has caused a certain amount of sensitivity, I guess you could say, within the VSBA. There's a couple districts that have dropped out as members. And so this communications subcommittee is working on developing surveys, developing input from board members, and actually boards and period, boards whether members or not, to understand what is the perceived value of the VSBA and what people are using for services and what services, if possible, or there might be that they aren't providing or aren't utilizing that different boards, local boards, might be interested in using or would like to see developed. So those are the types of, those are two activities that are of significance, if you will, as far as board operations are concerned. I somehow ended up on the communications subcommittee, so, but anyway, so I think that's enough for the VSBA activity, unless anybody's got any questions from the highlights.
Okay, I don't see any questions, so we'll keep moving along. Next is an update on board communications. And Kristen, did you want to speak to that?
There we go. So yeah, we've already talked about that a lot today. So how to tie it all together? I mean, there's administrative information that goes out. There's board committee information that goes out, and the committees are each doing their own communication. And then I've done some of the highlights from this meeting, and that's what people wanted, is some kind of a synopsis of stuff that is actually decisions we make or changes that are made, and then people can look at the minutes for the rest of the information, which isn't something that we need to share, that isn't timely. So I guess we don't need to decide it here, but are we going to have a cohesive sort of system for doing that? We've been using Front Porch Forum. In Moncton, we also use the Facebook page. But again, how to get information out so that the most people can have it. And obviously having it on the website is probably best, so that we can link to that and people can go there and get things. I mean, the website's a little bit messy right now. Just when you look at the front page, it's like boom, 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 boom. So not something to decide today, but just how are we going to streamline that, I guess, and make things easily. We're going to broadcast, and we're going to have somewhere where people can go and get information, right? So I guess how are we going to broadcast more effectively than we are, I guess, or do we need to change it? Or so I guess I just have questions, but also, you know, maybe one person per town could be the main communication person. And I think that would be easier and I think it's not bad for us to do that, so that people, it's not just coming out from a blast from Patrick on Front Porch Forum, but there's a human touch to it. So those are just some ideas I've had that we don't have time now to talk about them, but maybe next month we could talk about that more. So I guess what I'll do is I'll put out an email if there's one person from each town that would be willing to do that, so that when something's created, they would be the people to disseminate it. Because there's lots of information in lots of different places, and for lots of different audiences. So just thinking about that. Like for instance, who would post like the video that you're going to make, Patrick, or where would that go? And so that the most people possible could possibly see it, I guess. So anyway, just some thoughts.
One point of clarification I can add on that, and this I think feeds into the idea of talking about it further at the next meeting. You might recall many moons ago me mentioning work happening on a new website. That work has been slowed, but it has continued. And we have confidence, a fair bit of confidence, not certainty, but confidence that prior to your next board meeting in June, that the new, at least MAUSD website will be up and running. And that new website is much more student-centric, which to me is the greatest highlight, but it also, in that one place, in a very clear section of that website, has links to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It has feeds of pictures and news articles. And so it will be a much better go-to for everything than our current website is. And it will have to think about linking individuals' Front Porch Forum posts, for example, somehow to that website. I don't know quite how that would work. But Jennifer's been really leading the way in getting that work going, and understands the ins and outs of the website probably as well as anybody in MAUSD right now, so she can help facilitate that. But our website will be much better at achieving what the desired end is for communication than it currently is. Yeah, Krista?
That's great news about the website. And Kristen, thank you for taking the lead on sending things out and assigning people to do that. And, you know, I think maybe like we've played around with how to be more seamless about communication after we developed a communications plan, but it might be worth revisiting, like what worked, what didn't work, what, you know, so that, because I agree, it's scattershot right now. And in an ideal world, we'd have a paid PR and marketing person to do all of this for us, but we don't. But there's so much good info and we want to get it out. And so from the work of the, you know, the board communication, I think it's outlined in that plan, but we, you know, it probably is worth looking at again. And some of it is clarified in there, but maybe it doesn't make any sense based on what it's been like this past year. Anyway, it's a good topic.
And worth knowing too, you know, part of, as Jennifer took over the role as administrative assistant to the superintendent, in addition to that job description that I included in there was to help with sort of that public relations aspect. So she can be a resource in helping to even link communications that board members are sending out to individual towns or posting to district locations, social media, et cetera, to help make that work. So we can continue to partner with her to think about how to make that as seamless as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll look at the communications plan again before next month, and then we can just bring it up again. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. So the next thing we're down to is an executive session, and I'm just checking. It looks like Bella did go. Okay. So we are going to need an executive session for two reasons. One is Title I BSA 5, Section 313A, an employee. And the other one is Title I BSA 5, 313A1B, labor relations agreements with employees. The first one, don't need to determine premature knowledge because it's the evaluation of an employee. But the second one, we do need to determine that talking about it in public session would put the district at an advantage. It's my thought that since the contracts, specifically the labor agreements with both the support staff and the professional staff, have not been ratified. So according to our ground rules that we established in the beginning, we agreed that we wouldn't speak about the agreements until they were ratified, and then they would become a public document. So talking about them in specifics, as we're about to do, would put the district at an advantage. So we need to determine that first, and then we can move to go into executive session to discuss the two items. We'll also be inviting Patrick and Katrina into those, and then they'll leave at after the labor relations agreement, and then we will come out of it and come back to this meeting and have our board statement and ratify the contracts and finish the meeting. So is there someone who is willing to make a motion that having a discussion about labor relation agreements with employees in public session would put the district at a significant disadvantage?
Steve, so moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Sarah McLean.
All right, all those in agreement that discussing labor relation agreements in public session would put the district at a disadvantage, please say aye, or give me a thumbs.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, all right, knowing that, I need a motion to, yes.
I'm sorry, who made the motion and who seconded?
Steve and Kristen.
Thanks.
And Chris, while I have you there, if you want to go with that after, you know, when we go into executive session, I can just finish up the minutes.
You sure? You sure?
That's fine.
All right, I'll share it with you right now, and you can share it with Jen when you're done.
Okay. All right. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. A motion to you too. at 8:39 and invite Patrick and Katrina to join us to discuss Title I VSA 5313A3 evaluation of an employee and Title I VSA 5313A1B labor relation agreements with employees.
And then Floyd and Susan, you're all set?
You're all set?
Stick around for us coming out of executive session. And Don, I think you have a new invitation that we should be going to.
Yeah, I sent it in an email. So
If I can,
but we have to get.
I'm going to pause this recording, so we won't be recording on my screen anymore. And I'm going to mute everyone. And if you can turn your camera off.
I need a motion first.
Oh, sorry. I thought we had that.
No, they all went
So
quiet on
moved,
me.
Sarah McLean.
Don, what was the motion for before if we didn't cover it already?
Because we have to determine premature knowledge would put the district at a disadvantage first in order to go into executive session to discuss the labor.
Right. The double motion.
The double motion. So this is
I
to take us
second.
into executive session.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Andrew.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew second at 8:40. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, now Patrick, you're gonna pause this one. Is that
So I'm
right?
going to pause the recording on this Zoom, and I'm going to mute everyone. But it probably makes sense for everyone to also turn their camera off on this Zoom. So this screen will be not recording. It will not have any voices heard, and it wouldn't have any faces seen, just to cover our bases. So we're in the other Zoom for executive session. And when we exit executive session and we resume.
Patrick, it's not going to let you be on two calls at once, I'm pretty sure. You're going to have to leave this and come back to it.
Oh, okay. So the link should still be active then. So I guess we can end this call, and then I'll start it back up when we leave. Well, I'll need to know, Don, I guess you could text me, because I won't be in executive session till the end. You can text me when you're out of executive session, and I can start this link again for everyone.
And you can also just stay on it, Patrick, and we can all just leave and then rejoin, and you'll see us pop back in.
Okay, that works.
Well, Patrick's going to have to be on two calls then, because he's got to be in part of this other session.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so I'll just end this, and then we know this one's going to be over, and then I can start it up again, and we'll record when you come out of executive session. All right, so I'll go ahead and end this one. All right, we are recording.
We can start at 9:54. Is everybody, okay, so the board really just wants to announce that we are in support of all the work that went down around to come to the agreements with the employees and the professional staff, and more details will be forthcoming is our statement at this time. All right, so now we need to take action to ratify the support staff and professional staff collective bargaining agreements and authorize the chair to sign on behalf of the board.
So moved. Steve.
I second Andrew.
Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of ratifying the support staff and professional staff collective bargaining agreements and authorizing the chair to sign on behalf of the board, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any public comment at this time?
Besides, woohoo! Woohoo! Sorry.
Can I make a motion to evaluation tonight?
I think we can, given the late hour, we can definitely skip it tonight. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved,
At
Andrew.
9:58?
So moved, Andrew.
Andrew?
Second,
Is there a second?
Sarah.
All right. All those in favor of adjourning at 9:58, please say aye.
Aye.
Good night,
Thank you.
Thank you,
Get in before 10 o'clock. All right.
All right.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.